TV and movie star Hayden Panettiere's death.
Because there's a lot of stuff in there, and a lot of it doesn't add up. Initially, we were told that she was found in a chair. Now we're being told that she was in the bed.
And now what we know about her death is, well, there's been obviously an apparent overdose.
The first scene that I'm directing Hayden in, we are in the middle of a camera rehearsal, and I'm at the monitor, and Hayden's about 15 feet away on set, and I feel Brian hovering over my shoulder. And he leans in and he says to me, "You let me know what you need her to do. I can get her to do anything." And my immediate reaction to that was, what the but what I said was, all right, because what else do you say when you're in the middle of a rehearsal and somebody you didn't hire says that to you? In fact, it was a direct attempt to control, and it was presented like this bizarre power flex. We could all see it, and we all wanted to help.
That is director Griff first on Instagram, referring to Hayden Panettiere's then boyfriend leaning over his shoulder, stating, "Just tell me, I can get her to do anything." Correct me if I am wrong, Dave Mack, Crime Stories investigative reporter, but was he on the scene when Hayden Panettiere is found dead?
Yes, ma'am. He was right there. He was staying with her. They actually traveled together and were in Greenville, South Carolina at that Airbnb together when she passed.
Dave Mack, while I've got you, the feds swarming the Hollywood home of Hayden Panettiere. What happened?
Apparently, more than 6 feds showed up at her West Hollywood building. And according to an eyewitness resident, that they had search warrants and were entering that facility, her home. And the resident said that they were swarming all over, at least 6 agents counted by this resident. So it was a fairly large show of force.
You let me know what you need her to do. I can get her to do anything. That sentence appears in a public account from a director who watched a man lean over his shoulder on a film set and announce control over another human being as though it were a scheduling note. The man was Brian Hickerson. The woman he claimed to command was Hayden Panettiere, and the federal government has now entered the building. Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to Beyond the Gavel File, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. Picture a locked door at the end of a hallway. Behind it, a life has stopped. On the other side, 6 federal agents stand with a warrant. They are not knocking to check on anyone. They are not conducting a wellness visit. They are there because someone supplied something to someone who died, and the DEA does not deploy 6 agents to ask polite questions. That image, the locked door, the warrant, the swarm, is the entire case in one frame. The question is whether the person who held the key also held the drugs. The official language is precise. A search warrant obtained from a magistrate. A residence in West Hollywood. Agents executing a lawful entry. That is the bureaucratic version. The plain English version is shorter. The feds do not care about an overdose. They do not care that she was a television star. They care about one thing only: who got the substances into her hands. And, if that person was standing next to her, when the breathing stopped, the federal interest stops being abstract and becomes very personal.
Have been brought in on the investigation into Hayden Panettiere's death.
What does that mean, Nancy? It means that DEA equals the federal government. The federal government means resources, time, and it is not good. You remember when you were a prosecutor, Nancy, you go to court in state court, there's 80 people in the courtroom. You go to federal court, you're the only case. What does that tell you? Time is on their side, and they're going to spend it on a case like this.
Let me refine my question to Renee Rockwell. One of your main expertise is drug cases of all natures. It could be a doper on the street. It could be a drug lord. How often in your cases does the DEA swarm the home?
Not often, Nancy, and let me tell you something, it is not good news. These are the big boys, and they're playing for keeps.
But back to my question, my original question, why would the DEA get involved and what seems to be, what is said to be an OD. The feds don't care about an OD. They don't care if you're a movie star or a TV star.
Yes, they
don't
care.
care. So why are they in it?
Nancy, the reason they care is if somebody else supplied the drugs to her, even if it was a recreational, even if she consented to it, even if it's something they all decided and planned together, if someone else facilitated her possession of these drugs, even if they are legal drugs like whippets that might have been used in an illegal fashion, it's illegal.
Now here is the irony gap that defines this story. The public narrative for weeks framed this as a tragic accident. A young woman with a history of substance issues. A nap that never ended. Narcan on the scene. A boyfriend waking up. A brother arriving. Nothing to see, except the timeline shifted.
Back to Eileen Reslin joining us from Daily Mail. As I recall, the timeline begins around 10:30 where she's putting on makeup, and then I believe the boyfriend leaves to go pick something up. Give me that timeline to the best of your knowledge.
Yes, Nancy. So this timeline is according to Hayden's mother, Leslie, who claims that she spoke to police and they relayed information that Brian told them. So according to what Brian said to police, at 10:30 in the morning, Hayden is getting ready, putting on her makeup. They had plans later that day to meet up with his brother, Zach, to go to lunch and play some golf. And so he then steps out. We don't know when exactly he comes back, but apparently we don't even know if they exchanged some words or what exactly happened. But at some point, they lay down to take a nap. Now that time period is really important because when they take a nap, were they high? Had they used drugs? We don't know that yet. And then what we know next is that sometime around later 1 o'clock to 2 p.m., Zach shows up and he's knocking on the door because they're not answering his texts and trying to, reunite with them to go to their plans. And then that's when they found Hayden sadly unresponsive.
His brother gave us a statement that he texted Brian and Hayden on that Sunday morning, last Sunday, and didn't get a response, went to this Airbnb where they were, and then found Brian, who had just woken up, and Hayden laying in a bed. And Brian then administered Narcan to her.
From our friend Harvey Levin at TMZ. Okay, Renee Rockwell, you're the defense attorney. You do see the problems, the implications of that statement that the boyfriend's brother gives as to what happened. He texts, and nobody answered. They're clearly out cold. Is she already dead? That would be my question. What was the temperature of her body when paramedics finally got there? I need answers. They're out. They're not answering text. The brother gets there. The boyfriend is just waking up. And they see Hayden Panettiere out. And then
first she was in a chair. Then she was in a bed. Then she was putting on makeup. Then she was asleep. When official stories start moving furniture, the viewer should ask why the room keeps changing. Hickerson himself has provided the most damning material without a subpoena.
I think it speaks for itself. I mean, I got arrested for, abusing her, and I wouldn't blame her friends for being pissed off at me. I had a lot to drink, and I got physical with her, and I got arrested, spent the night in jail, and, that's just what happens when you lay hands on women. So there's a story where I was drunk, right? Aiden was standing across the room, and I had a phone in my hand, and I said, Hayden, I'll give you 10 seconds to run as fast as you can before I throw it at you.
what does that mean? I'll give you 10 seconds to run for the road. That's from TMZ. What is he talking about, Eileen Reslin? I'll give you 10 seconds to run for it.
No, he was incredibly manipulative with Hayden, Nancy. He would send her threatening messages. I mean, even after he had gotten convicted for domestic violence, he told her time to go to war if she didn't drop the charges. And he also threatened to release information that he said was overseas. What that was, we don't know, but he alluded to it being incriminating and to really trying to ruin Hayden's reputation. So the lengths that this man would go, I mean, everybody around her was really concerned. I actually interviewed people in Hayden's inner circle who told me that he was a lot of trouble and people really tried to get her away from him. But unfortunately, even to her final days, she just could not escape him.
What I did, and I just want people to know, I mean, like, people do this all the time, It's like, you think I'm the only one that did that? No. People do that all the time.
From TMZ, people do what all the time? Beat up their partner? Is that what he's saying, Dave Mack?
Yes, that is exactly what he
In
is
interviews that are matters of public record, he described getting physical with Panettiere and then said, "That's just what happens when you lay hands on women." He said other people do it all the time. Not a denial. A normalization. The phrase we need to hold on to here is casual cruelty. It appears in his language, in his behavior, in his assumption that a partner is property. Casual cruelty. The DEA swarm is what happens when casual cruelty intersects with a supply chain and a death. Casual cruelty. The federal interest is not about whippets as a punchline. Nitrous oxide can stop a heart, alcohol can suppress respiration. But DEA agents are not building a task force around a canister of nitrous unless it traveled through hands that had no right to supply it. The legal threshold is simple. If someone facilitated possession, even with consent, even recreationally, that is a felony. And if the substance contributed to death, the exposure is no longer a footnote, it is the headline. The question the entire case now turns on is this: while Hayden Panettiere was unconscious behind that door, was there someone still awake who could have called for help and chose not to?
The feds have swarmed the Hollywood home. Whip it, schmip it, don't care.
Well, there are reports that she tried allegedly to get whippets a few months ago and was unsuccessfully unable to do so during her book tour. But what we do know is that when she died in Greenville, South Carolina, that there was a bag of medication that she had on her person. And we know that because in the police report, it's mentioned that Brian Hickerson told police, look, she has these bags of medications. And so alluding to maybe she might have been using them at the time. Also, there was Narcan on the scene. So, and we know now that it was used. And according to Brian's brother, Zach Hickerson, who was also on the scene, Brian was the person who allegedly administered the Narcan. So that also shows to some opioid usage. So yes, Nancy, I agree with you. There are signs there that there were stronger drugs at play.
I'm curious about the use of the Narcan, which is a whole nother direction, but since you brought it up, let's go with it. To Jeff Gentry joining us, forensic certified bloodstain pattern analyst. He is a death investigator. He is author of Forensic Science, Applications to Death and Crime Scene Investigations. And you can find him at evidenceoverassumption.com. Jeff Gentry, thank you for being with us. There has been a lot of discussion and proof. It can, of course, be debunked. There are allegations, let me put it more clearly, that the Narcan was not administered until after Hayden was found dead. That the boyfriend that she had told security keep him away woke up and looked over and Hayden is dead. So, Jeff Gentry, let's address the use of Narcan and how we can tell if it was used by her or administered to her in life or post-mortem.
That is not a tabloid question. That is a federal inquiry dressed as a horror film.
Again, Renee Rockwell, I don't know why you keep talking about whippets, but when the feds come in your home pursuant to search warrant, which is significant, and they've got a whole team of this is not a well-being check.
No wellness
The
check
fact
here,
that the feds
Nancy.
obtain a search warrant from a magistrate or judge and then swarm the home with no warning, these are DEA agents. Why?
This is
What are they
this is
looking for?
this is not a wellness check, Nancy. This is obviously going to be a federal investigation. And does it disturb you that somebody's got Narcan on the scene? What does that mean to you? Are they planning on having to rescue someone from an overdose?
We're still waiting on a timeline. No one is a suspect. No one is a person of interest. That's what we know tonight. But there is, let's just say, a development in the investigation that feds swarmed the home, and they're not just any feds, they're DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency feds. Dr. Bethany Marshall, a psychoanalyst out of LA, you can see her on Netflix, Hulu, Bravo, author of a brand new book, and she's a star of a new podcast, On the Couch with Dr. Bethany. Jump in, Bethany.
You know, Nancy, I'm going to guess that the DEA was not doing a welfare check in West Hollywood. They were swarming her home because there's a supply chain behind this overdose. And let's think about what a supply chain could be. It could be drugs being produced from overseas coming over the border, or it could be doctors in Beverly Hills, in West Hollywood, around the country supplying opioids. What was their drug of choice? Opioids. Who addicted her to opioids? Someone on a set.
The Mathew Perry precedent is unavoidable. A doctor supplied. An assistant injected. A man died in water. Federal prosecutors did not charge Perry with anything. They charged the supply line.
Nancy, and good luck. Renee Rockwell, you and I were both practicing in the same courthouse when the star of All in the Family and Heat of the Night, Carol O'Connor's son, had died of a drug overdose, and the supplier ended up in court. So this theory is not new.
No, but now people can prove these allegations a lot easier with phones, text messages, GPS. We know where everybody is. There's cameras all over town now. Hard to hide.
The legal theory is not untried. We saw it with the so-called ketamine queen to Dr. Bethany Marshall. Let's see a look at this piece of work. This is a multimillionaire socialite that supplied Mathew Perry with ketamine, including the fatal dose. Look at her. She looks like a fashion model. Everybody sucked up to her. She was the queen because she supplied their drugs. What about that luxe lifestyle, Dr. Bethany?
You know, Nancy, every Hermes bag, every Christian Dior pair of eyeglasses, the penthouse, the luxury car, all of that was paid for by victims' lives, by addicting victims, by supplying them in ways that
What is that on her foot? Wait, Bethany, what is that?
The Hermes, that is the Hermes bag,
How much
Nancy.
does that cost?
That's the Birkin.
How
about
much does that cost?
$30,000. Okay. And it looks like she may be in a penthouse there, or maybe it's her own house. But, you know, Nancy, if we take this back to Brian Hickerson, you know, just like that Queen Bee has Hermes bags on her foot, what did Brian Hickerson have? I'd be so interested to know that. Did she pay for his housing? Did she lease, rent, or buy a car for him? Did he have a Rolex watch?
The same structural logic applies here. Hickerson is not currently named as a suspect. That is a legal status, not a moral one. The difference matters.
What he is saying, Brian Hickerson has been arrested at least 4 times across multiple incidents involving domestic violence and drug-related charges. And, you know, Nancy, this even came up in the recent past, in the last few weeks, when Hickerson actually went before a judge to have his record expunged. And the judge referenced an interview he did that you were just listening to with TMZ, where Hickerson is obviously under the influence. But backing up his history, Nancy, May of 2019, Hickerson arrested on suspicion of domestic violence against Hayden Panettiere. charges were initially dismissed when prosecutors couldn't secure a material witness, but later covered a broader 2020 indictment when he pleaded no contest to that one in 2021. In Wyoming in 2020, he was arrested on Valentine's Day for misdemeanor battery after an alleged domestic incident. August 2025, just over a year ago, arrested at a bar, Barney's Beanery. That case was later declined for prosecution due to insufficient evidence. And then we have August 6th of 2025, where Hickerson was arrested days after the Barney's Beanery incident and booked on a misdemeanor count of being under the influence. So Hickerson has a long record. But Nancy, there's something really important that Hayden Panettiere said in a statement in 2020 in talking about Brian Hickerson. She was speaking out publicly about, surviving domestic abuse. And she actually said this, quote, "I'm coming forward with the truth about what happened to me, with the hope that my story will empower others in abusive relationships to get the help they need and deserve. I am prepared to do my part to make sure this man never hurts anyone again."
Renee Rockwell, a defense attorney, did you hear him say, yeah, people do it all the time? It's not just me. What? Is that the defense? Everybody else does it?
Nancy,
Beat their partner?
Nancy, how much as a prosecutor did you love that statement? That was painful for me.
No warrant means no probable cause has been articulated publicly. But a federal magistrate did sign something. 6 agents did execute something. That means a judge read an affidavit and decided there was enough to cross a threshold. What was in that affidavit is the only document that now matters. It is likely sealed. It will not stay sealed forever. Hickerson's own financial reality adds weight. Public bankruptcy records show a man with roughly $20,000 to his name and $60,000 in debt.
Insurance does not pay for 10 months of rehab. She paid for that out of her own pocket because she wanted to be sober. Now, with Brian Hickerson, if he kept supplying drugs, what might have happened is that they created what we call a kindling effect in the brain. So if you go on and off substances, it actually will, like kindling a fire, it will make the brain want those substances even more. So this is not just him supplying her with opioids one time, but if there was that intermittent supply of opioids, she could have wanted it more and more. And we saw with Whitney Houston, when she was sober for a long, long time and then relapsed on drugs, she had a heart attack. So that's the other thing, is Hayden may have been trying to stay sober, but if Brian reintroduced the drug, she could no longer tolerate that high dose of the medication.
But Bethany, and I'm going to throw this to Eileen Reslin from Daily Mail, following up on what Dr. Bethany just said. To me, that is motivation for him to keep her alive if she's his meal ticket. But motive doesn't matter. If he enabled, like Ketamine Queen, who gave Mathew Perry 50 vials, 50, not 15, not 5, 50 vials of ketamine. Yeah, her. There she is with a Hermes bag. At least it's not on her foot this time. Her, the assistant that gave him the fatal dose, was there, and then he goes underwater and dies. Belushi, Carol O'Connor, on and on and on. Did he have a job, or was he just a parasite, a leech, sucking her dry?
He was absolutely using Hayden as his meal ticket. We at the Daily Mail uncovered bankruptcy documents that showed this man had no money to his name, pretty much only 20 grand, but then like 60 grand in debt. So he was broke. And people that I spoke to said that he just presented himself as a slob. So there were no fancy watches. There were no designer clothes that he was wearing. I mean, if he was using some of the money, it could have been for drugs, because we know that he had substance abuse issues. But this man was not living the high life by any chance, or, a fancy life. So, but he really was dependent on, they had a codependent relationship that's very, very clear. And sadly,
let me just ask this. Let me just cut through all that. Who paid the bills? Did he do anything?
No, he only had, I believe, one acting credit on IMDb, and nobody would hire him. And actually, his LinkedIn shows that he was the executive assistant to a celebrity client. So you can imagine who that would be. He was essentially, if you look at his LinkedIn, it states that he would do errands and, just like everyday chores.
Errands.
For the client. Yes.
He had no visible income. He had one IMDb credit. He listed himself as an executive assistant to a celebrity client. That client was Panettiere. He was not the provider. He was the dependent. When a dependent person loses the source of support, grief and liability look very similar from the outside. The federal question is whether that dependency ever became instrumental, whether keeping her unwell was more useful than keeping her alive.
I'm thinking about a patient of mine whose husband was extremely abusive. He would ply her with alcohol and the next day say, you gave me your credit card, right? You agreed that I would drive your Rolls Royce, right? So when you ply a victim with drugs or alcohol, it really cements your power over them because the victim feels so helpless, so ashamed. They can't remember what happened when they were high. They feel thrown off balance all of the time. So that increases the power differential. Now, when Brian Hickerson says in that interview, I had to be vulnerable and I had to read about myself, he's taking no responsibility for what he did to Hayden or that he brutalized her. So Hayden isn't it. She's not really a real person. He's just talking about himself. And then when he goes on to say, they need to teach this stuff earlier, in education to young men, something like that. Now he's shifting responsibility onto the educational system. So in no way is he taking responsibility for himself. And Nancy, the smoking gun here is two things. One little snippet you showed at the beginning of the show where he's on set with the producer. He had invaded her professional life and was taking over her friendships. That's a classic sign of abuse. The fact that he sold her vintage guitar before her death, he was already taking her items and he was profiting from her financially. And those two things, I think, that's not just enabling, that's being a leech.
Question, Dave Mack, Crime Stories. What effect would the whippets and booze have on Hayden?
Nancy, the whippets and booze can really create a major quag for anyone that abuses them. What she was asking for just a couple of months before her passing, and it was industrial strength nitrous. Okay, we're not talking about getting the generic Cool Whip and sucking out the nitrous at the bottom of the can here. But whippets can lead to seizure-like convulsions, Nancy. You do too much of them, you become semi-conscious. You can end up with these convulsions that send you into cardiac arrest. People die from nitrous oxide and don't think
the director's quote loops back with a heavier weight now. I can get her to do anything. At the time, it sounded like a power flex. In retrospect, it sounds like a confession of control architecture. Because the most dangerous person in an overdose is not always the one who hands over the drug. It is the one who watches the clock after. It is the one who waits too long. It is the one whose call for help arrives after the body has already cooled.
If she died of an OD, by the way, that's from our friend Harvey Levin at TMZ. If she did die from an OD, how would I tell if someone else administered that to her?
That's exactly what we should be looking at in this case. Nancy, I want to comment a little bit on the friend that was with her. I know people, and I have people in my life that I am very close to, that I care very much about, that are victims of domestic violence. And the people that are abusers don't care about the person they're with. They care only about themselves. And just hearing his demeanor and the way he spoke about her and his history of domestic violence, he didn't care one bit about her. And you got to look very closely at these people when there are overdoses. You have to look at cell phone records. You have to look at the circumstances, the scene. You have to collect fingerprints, every bit of evidence you possibly can to see who was actually involved in administering these drugs, because that could be a key factor in determining, was it her that ingested these on her own under her free will, or was she coerced into doing so? Was she forced into doing so? That is a key part that needs to be determined in this investigation.
Great example. Hold on, Jeff Gentry. Great example, Dr. Bethany Marshall. Belushi, one of the greatest comedians that ever lived, was reportedly afraid of needles, so he had a female inject him with a lethal dose of drugs. That would be an enabler. Here's another example. Listen.
Defendant Placentia knew full well the danger of what he was doing. In fact, on one occasion, he injected Mr. Perry with ketamine, and he saw Mr. Perry freeze up and his blood pressure spike. Despite that, he left additional vials of ketamine for defendant Iwamasa to administer to Mr. Perry. Of course, defendant Iwamasa had no medical training to speak of.
That was U.S. Attorney Martin Estrada, and he was referring to not only the doctor that supplied Friends star Mathew Perry ketamine illegally, but also his dutiful and loyal assistant, Iwamana, who enabled the lethal dose and then left Mathew Perry to die in a hot tub.
The timeline becomes evidence. The gaps become evidence. The inconsistent story becomes evidence.
Lawyer, it doesn't matter if we like him. It doesn't matter if he's a slug. It doesn't matter if he's a tick sucking her dry. That does not a murder make. That does not assisting in a homicide or assisting in an OD make. He's not charged. He's not a person of interest. He's not a suspect. From what I can tell right now, he's just a leech. But the fact that he is there and the timeline seems to have been altered. At one point they say that she's in a chair. At one point she's lying down. Who left to go get something while Hayden's laying there in the bed? If the timeline is inconsistent or statements are given that conflict with each other, there is a problem. But right now, tonight, we ain't got nothing on him. Plain and simple.
Nancy, he is not a suspect. Maybe he's a leech. Maybe he's a slob. What did he have? Bethany says he didn't have anything. What he had was constant, consistent contact. He kept getting back in, Now, he's made a statement. If the statements are inconsistent, that puts his credibility at issue, and that's how a case is built. Again, not a suspect, still innocent.
A leech does not an accessory to murder make. You may have...
Here is what you can do right now. Search for the South Carolina Incident Report connected to the Greenville Airbnb. It is publicly available or requestable through the local law enforcement agency. Read the narrative section carefully. Then read the coroner's preliminary statement if it has been released in your jurisdiction. Ask one question in the comments below. At what time did the first call for medical assistance actually go out, and who made it? That single data point answers more than any cable panel ever will. And here is the ending that writes itself. 6 agents, 1 warrant. A woman who told security to keep him away. A man who said he could get her to do anything. And the only thing left moving in that room was the clock. If you want to know where this is heading, watch what gets unsealed next. Because the DEA does not swarm a dead woman's home to close a file. It swarms to open one. If this breakdown gave you the full legal picture that mainstream coverage keeps skipping, hit like, share it with someone who needs to see the evidence, and subscribe to Beyond the Gavel File with notifications on. We read the documents, you get the truth.